Now we're going through a few questions, and then the first question is about menstruation. And before I ask Sharon the question, I want to give a bit about how the menstruation affected me, because I said earlier that I'm a survivor of FGM, meaning I've had FGM done to me. So when I was growing up, I had FGM done when I was very young, around the age of 5. So then I didn't have any trauma or anything like that to disturb me. But then when I got married, that's when my problem started. And I started having a very painful and heavy menstruation, up to the point that it's stopping me from going to work or eating or able to do anything. I remember even when I want to go to the toilet, I have to crawl, because when I stand up, it's painful. And then when I sit down, it's very painful. So I would like to ask the question and say, it says, how might menstruation be challenging for someone who had FGM? So I would like if Sharon can just enlighten us about this.
In all truth, Babs, I think you've probably enlightened us more than anything I can, more than pretty much anything I can say. One of the things that I guess I would start by reflecting is when I have looked, and when I was looking, so as Bab was saying, we've pulled together with support of Oxford Against Cutting amongst other groups, we've tried to put together some resources to help GPs support patients, families, communities who might be affected by FGM. And in looking for kind of science or evidence to support those, I guess my reflection would be that there is a lot of really great research, but it is quite focused on antenatal and maternity care on the whole, and that there are bits across the kind of life course where there isn't as much that I could find, and if anyone has any, I would be very glad to see it, but there isn't as much written. So a lot of what we pulled together was kind of quite practical or quite pragmatic, and also based on our clinical experience. And I think that's pretty much where I am with menstruation. So menstruation is often listed as one of the things that people can find difficult, but I haven't come across in writing kind of a huge amount of nuance or detail about that. So I guess what I'm going to say are my reflections and, as I said, practical observations and clinical experience, but anything that anyone can add to it or correct me, this is by no means exhaustive. And I guess I would also start by saying that menstruation is often painful and difficult. My actual current research is about period pain in teenagers. So I think it's worth remembering that period pain is often difficult and periods can often be heavy for anyone, and that I think I would say, got a bit to learn about supporting and meeting all those support needs across all young people who are experiencing menstruation. But thinking specifically a bit about how we can think about that kind of interface between periods and menstruation and FGM, I guess thinking about things like physical impacts. If you have got scarring that is going over where the menstrual blood might leave, then you can get an impact to flow or slower flow, which can mean that periods can be longer and heavier. You can get those build-ups, and people often talk about back pain and really significant cramping pain and difficulty, but also just difficulty for the blood coming out, which can then risk things like slow flow and perhaps infection, although I haven't seen much science about that. That will depend a little bit on the type of FGM, but perhaps more universal is that I do also think that if you've had pain in that area and you've had trauma to that area, then experiencing pain in the genital region can be quite triggering and quite emotional and quite difficult. And I think that's probably also perhaps true of experiencing bleeding or seeing blood from that area. And also, if you've got really sensitized nerve endings in that area because of injuries that have happened there, then that kind of close contact with menstrual products is often painful. So physical contact with pads or using the products to support menstruation can be difficult. So I think thinking broadly across all the things where it might impact, and then just being really individualized, because the person who's going to know most about how their menstruation is experienced and what it's like for them is the person who you are talking to, but just thinking how might menstruation be experienced and how might it be difficult, and which bits could we think about can be helpful. And from a really kind of practical GP medical point of view, some of the things that you might kind of be able to put on the table or think about, again, are things that you might think about with anyone experiencing kind of difficult menstruation. But things like options for pain relief, but also options for supporting against things like period poverty and remembering and thinking about that. But also thinking for some people, it might be a useful thing to think about hormonal treatments that could really reduce how often or how much people bleed and just get rid of some of that pain and trauma. So sorry.
That's fine, thank you. And I mean, what you say is right, because I know that the first time I had to use, well, it's not a modern sanitary pad, it's like a cloth that you put in between your pants, was when I went through FGM. So the first time when I started seeing my menstruation, having that gave me a flashback of that. So it makes me feel like, oh, it's like I've been caught again, actually, with not physically, but mentally it is there. So thank you very much for that.
That's right. I think the other time to think about that kind of flashback and triggering, I mean, there are lots of others, but actually, it's just reminded me that thinking about postnatally, so after people have given birth, that's another time when you might have kind of wounds and scars and stitches and bleeding in that area. That is also an opportunity maybe to check in with support that could be offered. And yeah, so thank you, Babs.
Thanks, Barbara. And so we move to the second question, and then this one is regarding intimacy, because part of the problems of FGM, women tend to have, the people that went through it, the survivors tend to have difficulties in having sexual intimacy with their partners. So, for example, me as a survivor, I'm not exempted from this. I still have problems, you know. Having an intimacy with my husband is always a challenge for me. And then all the time, when I had to lie down in that position, whatever the position is, even if it's not true sexual intimacy, but any kind of, for example, medical procedures that are very, very, you know, very, very close to as if you're going through FGM, where you have to lie down on your back, spread your legs. It always brings flashback for me. And talking about relationship, it affects, I am lucky that my husband is a bit understanding, or I would say he's fully understanding now, but it was not like that since the beginning of our marriage. I had to, it took time for him to understand. At some point, he said to me, tell me how this affects you. Tell me what pain you go through. And in a way, it's a bit difficult for me because I don't want him to feel sorry for me up to the point that it affects our relationship. Neither does I want also to be in pain all the time that I have sexual intercourse with my husband. So these things is really a problem in relationship for survivors. And then all the time you think about lying down there, being vulnerable, and then going through pain from something that you're supposed to gain pleasure. And it makes you not think about it. In general, I don't think about it. I only go through it because I want to satisfy my husband. And of course, I don't want him to go and get married to another woman. So, but then this is those kind of things that always affect people. And then to you, Sharon, it says that some women, you know, who have gone FGM may find intimacy relationship difficult. Do you have come across anybody who ever disclosed this to you, or any, you know, theories or literatures out there that talk about this issue?
Thank you, Babs. And I'm really, thank you for sharing how difficult it has been and can be for you. And I'm really, I'm really sorry, sad to hear.
All right.
But glad that you've navigated a way through it. I think these are really real issues, and it's amazing that they're being talked. I think I guess the first step, or a step, is spaces where you can start thinking about and talking about what that means and how it feels like and how it's affecting you. And so supporting, and for you, talking really powerfully about having those conversations within your relationship, but either as individuals and with relationships and with partners, all those conversations, trying to find spaces where they can happen. Again, sex and intimacy is something that is difficult, can be difficult for array, lots of people for lots of reasons, but this is a critically important one of them. There is support available, and actually for those of us in Oxford, we're incredibly lucky, because at the Oxford Rose Clinic, who will take open referrals, there is a specialist psychosexual therapist who works there and can help individuals and individuals in partnerships kind of think about some ways of working through it. And she would talk about how some of the techniques that can be used to help conditions where the vagina is painful for sex translate across and can be helpful for people who've had FGM, and that includes things. So I know she recommends a website called Hope and Hope, which is about a different kind of vaginal pain, but there's always that thing where if you can take one thing that's useful from something, then that's often a thing worth having. And I know she can also help people understand the genital anatomy and where the clitoris is, because the clitoris is more than its external part. It has kind of roots that extend back towards the vagina. So she can sometimes help people understanding that, kind of develop a knowledge of their bodies, and that can be kind of practically helpful. I think I guess the important thing is for us as health professionals, but is being aware of how difficult this can be, and working collaboratively with people we're saying to create spaces where you can start having those conversations, so that you can have a kind of doorway to finding ways that can be supportive or work for that person, and also making sure that they are safe and okay and not feeling at risk or vulnerable for any other things in that relationship. But I think also your point about that being in that position being triggering, and how that translates across into medical settings is kind of a separate thing, but it's incredibly important. And I think it's a really important thing for health professionals to be aware of. And I think it's something that we can learn, that can be heard and can be learned from people coming in and saying, this is going to be triggering, I might dissociate, I might have a flashback, working together about how you might try and negotiate that, so that the person coming in has as much autonomy and control. They have choice about where, you need the things that can try and make that easier, but mostly just awareness and creating time and space and support feels really important. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you. Okay, and next question is about childbirth. So this question is really dear to me, because I had my first trauma after having during having my baby, my first son. So childbirth is something that's always difficult for me. I've got 3 boys. Only God knows how I managed to get 3. But then each childbirth, one thing stays the same, is that every time I went through labor, I get cut. So to me, that's like going through FGM 4 times. And then you can see now why I'm talking about painful sex, because I have about 4 different scar tissue down there. And obviously it's not elastic anymore as it was before FGM. And it's always a painful memory to go through, go through childbirth, because all the time I bleed a lot, and then I will end up getting a tear, or my first one was I was cut because they had to help me. And I was lying down there, someone behind me, and two midwives one holding my left knee, the other holding my right knee. And, you know, that was the same situation I was at when I was going through FGM. So, yeah, this is something that impacted me, and then it will always stay with me forever. So the question is, what are the impacts of FGM on childbirth for some women who have undergone the practice?
Yeah, again, Babs, I think you've answered this question in all of the most important ways. I guess the one thing I would say is there is, and this probably goes for the question about sex as well, that it is worth remembering that FGM is not one thing. It's a kind of term that has lots of different types within it, and some of the physical impacts and some of the physical things might vary throughout that, but the potential for what you're talking about as well, about triggering and scar tissue and trauma and pain and bleeding and being held in position, all of those things maybe are kind of a universal arc across it. So it's sometimes helpful to, I think that's a helpful thing to think, but it does also mean that the impact on sex and childbirth can vary between people. So obviously kind of being individualized and personalized and not making assumptions is immensely important. But recognizing what you're saying is hugely important. And I think antenatal pathways have made huge steps in this. That's not to say there aren't always scope for further steps and improvement, but having opportunities to have supportive conversations and have a recognition before you give birth, and a supportive team who might understand your needs is really, really important. And yeah, I think that probably, and this is something where I think GPs have some opportunity, is about after birth creating spaces to acknowledge, to reflect, to touch base, to offer support, and to recognize, and to try and hear and think about whether there might be support needs, and that might be with psychological input, it might be physical, whatever it is, but just recognizing the importance of the potential kind of impact of that, and making sure that we're maybe a bit proactive at the postnatal check in thinking about that.
Thank you. So the next question, I will let Sharon to take a lead, only because I've not got to that point yet, but it doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it. So it says, please can you speak a little on FGM and menopause, how menopause can affect someone that's been through FGM, or in women in general.
Yeah, no, thank you. And actually, do you know, when I was looking for research in science and facts, this was an area where I really couldn't find anything. The only thing I found on kind of Googling it was other people saying there was nothing, that we don't know. And I guess my experience would be and actually I guess for all types of FGM, but for example, if you're thinking about somebody who had scarring after childbirth, or reclosing or re-healing of an area of scarring, or had been reinfibulated if they'd had type 3 FGM, I guess my reflection would be that maybe because a lot of our thinking about FGM is focused in antenatal care, when you're looking after someone who has completed their family, maybe those opportunities to remember to think about it, to open conversations, to ask about it, I would say maybe happen a bit less in health settings. And the changes that happen around them, and actually this is in a background context, I guess, of increasing awareness of women's health needs around the menopause, and actually kind of quite well documented inequities in accessibility of menopause care. So there's a whole backdrop to this, but the changes that happen in menopause that can be really relevant to FGM include that when the estrogen levels drop, the vaginal skin becomes thinner, it becomes drier, it becomes a bit tired. And my experience of supporting people is that can be a time when you can kind of start having other symptoms or difficulties related to some types of FGM. And as I said, then it becomes a bit of a kind of tricky cycle, because you're also not in a place where people are maybe thinking about it or asking about it. I think we perhaps make assumptions about sex in menopausal and postmenopausal women, and maybe don't continue to ask about sex, but it often remains relevant and can remain really difficult. And so some quite specific examples of thinking about things like recurrent urine infections and urine infections coming back and being a real difficulty, and that can lead to real kind of complications if you're not picking it up and thinking about it as well, and back pain. And I've certainly had experience of women who've gone through the change who are just kind of treated again and again for things like water infections, and kind of quite a lot of courses of treatment in when you step back and say, actually, have you been closed again? Have you got scarring? Might that be why? And then being able to go on and offer kind of treatment with estrogen cream that can help make the skin feel a bit less friable or less difficult, or even having de-infibulation after the menopause can kind of make some of those problems hugely better. And so I guess my observation, and this is just my observation, is that from kind of anecdotal, is that you can still make a real impact, and that we should still be thinking about it and asking about it.
Thank you. Also, I just want to say that about the support, because the next one is about what support is available really. So for me in general, my first childbirth, when I was pregnant, I didn't understand much about. I know I've had FGM done since when I was young, but I didn't know how it's going to affect me as an adult, how it's going to affect me. I was certainly never thinking of it was ever going to affect me during childbirth or in my marriage or whatsoever. So when I got married, my midwife just told me, asked me, because, you know, they have these maps that shows countries that were still practicing FGM. And then she said to me, "You're from the Gambia?" I said, "Yes." So she looked at the map and said, "So have you had FGM done?" I said, "Yeah, I've had FGM done." But then that was the end of the conversation. Nothing else happened. We talked about the birth and what I can have, what pain relief and have, but nothing specifically about FGM and what to expect. Then I was just a layman about FGM. I didn't know anything or how it was going to affect me during childbirth. So, well, after I've been through that childbirth, that my trauma came to me. I started having trauma, and all the problems started, all the flashbacks, all the emotions, and the mental health issue part of it. I used to just look at my son and started crying for no reason. I don't know why. Part of me think that maybe I felt that I nearly lost him when I was giving birth to him. So having him in my hands, looking at his huge eyes, looking at me, always make me feel emotional. And even now that he's older, it still makes me feel emotional. He's 9 years old now, but it always makes me feel emotional that I nearly lost him during his first trying to enter this war. And I didn't have any after support. The physical support was okay, because then they gave me some bloods, because I lost so many bloods, and then they checked the scar and, you know, everything. But both the midwives, the health visitors, the GP review, nobody ever mentioned the FGM. Nobody asked me, "You've been through FGM, how are you feeling about going through the childbirth? How are you feeling after?" Those questions would have meant something, because then I would know someone is there to listen to me. Because sometimes all what we need is someone to listen. You know, probably you might not have to do anything, but just listen and then be that human for us. So but I didn't have that care. I end up being my own therapist by talking about this. That was when I decided that, okay, this that happened to me during childbirth, I don't want it to happen to any other girl. So I will start sharing my experiences. And after I started doing that, the more I talk about it, the more I feel better. And my second pregnancy, I went to see a specialist midwife. So I thought, okay, this one is going a bit different, because that one I didn't, and the first one I didn't see any specialist midwife. So I thought that it's going to be more advanced discussion around FGM. But when I went, I was disappointed because it was all about ticking the boxes. And then at the end, she said to me, you know that if you have a girl, we're going to safeguard it. And that still stays with me because I was so upset about that statement. I mean, I've been through FGM fair enough, but that doesn't mean if I have a girl, she's going to go through FGM. You haven't seen any red flags. I didn't have a child that's been through FGM. How can you just tell me that statement straight away that if I have a girl, it's going to be safeguarded? So same thing went through. That was end of the story, and I was examined by I think it was a doctor or some specialist around FGM, and that person said that I had type 2 done. So I said, fair enough, and then that was it. Nothing about the child back or anything. Everything just went quiet. So I wonder what kind of help was there. It was only during my third pregnancy, then I was referred to the Rose Clinic. So one thing I do when I'm pregnant all the time, when they say, okay, there's also FGM specialist, do you want me to refer you? Even though I know most of it, I said yes. So I just go through it anyway. And then I was lucky to meet Brenda at the Rose Clinic. And my third pregnancy was different. I had more help, but only it was late. They offered me psychological help, but then I don't feel like I need it anymore. I felt like I've already become my own psychologist. I already found my way around how to overcome my traumas. And the only way I know is to talk about them. So, but this is not for me now, it's for every survivor. What can we do? What support are out there that people can refer them to? So like I mentioned before, this was a twin event with Surveyor UK, and on Wednesday we had they had theirs in Liverpool, and I had to go there. It was face to face, and for the first time ever, after speaking, somebody else came out, a survivor, and said, "I've also been through this." She said, "When you were speaking, it was like I'm the one standing there and talking." So she said, "I went through difficulty of childbirth, and I also didn't have any help." So for the benefit of everyone, where and how can we signpost people to get help, especially the aftercare?
I mean, Babs, what I think is that if every health professional in the country who's delivering this care could hear you speak, that maybe would be a very important start, and I would love to be able to make that happen. Yeah. I think because I think in all seriousness, I think that is true. I'm really, really sorry that you've had such difficulties and that you've been able to create such power and healing from it. I absolutely share and hear what you're saying about the assumptions and the navigation of the safeguarding conversation, and I hear what you're saying about how that was experienced, and also hear what you're saying about not making assumptions about people's intentions or what they believe or what they're doing. Somebody's put the National FGM support clinics in the chat, which is a really good resource, and there are often other local resources. There is also kind of general psychological support available throughout England through IAPT, and through also support through networks like this and through advocacy services. And I think I would say that one of the best things that has happened in my working life is the recognition of how we could do better to create and generate this support, and clinics like the national NHS clinics and the Oxford Rose Clinic and all of the services and organisations delivering it. But I think your message, Babs, is the most powerful reminder that the doorway to services is starting conversations and having spaces where those conversations can happen so that the next steps and the support can happen. And that's why I think that's why your message is just so incredibly powerful. I think you're right about postnatal care, and a very powerful message about antenatal care, but what you then do with that information. And I think there is something about being trauma informed in all of the conversations we have, and then that does involve responding and recognizing kind of what we're hearing and being able to move forward with that, and thinking about when and how we have the conversations, but what we do with it. And I know from my qualitative interviews with GPs, one of the things that was incredibly important to them about feeling able to open supportive conversations and to start the dialogue of care was knowing that you had somewhere meaningful, accessible, acceptable, local to refer to. And that really enabled the start of this process. So I think service provision, good service provision, community-led, advocated, informed, trauma-informed, holistic service provision has to be at the heart of this, because I think it then enables everything else, and maybe it will start enabling those conversations that can be the doorway. But you need, I think, having somewhere to access care is a really important part of that. We are, and I'm really sorry to hear about Reading. We are lucky in Oxford. We need to fight for these services, and we need to keep advocating, and we need to keep at the heart of what we do the necessity and the importance of this. And they have to be underpinned by being personalized, by being individualized, and absolutely by not making assumptions about any needs, but available to meet any needs.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. So at the end of the day, that's what we really want, to have someone to understand us. I mean, like, I'm also in the system, and I know how all the subject matters, how they flag them and how they approach survivors of those people in that particular area being abused or sexual violence and stuff like that. I just want same for survivors of FGM, because as far as I'm concerned, it's just like a mayor alert, oh, she's been through FGM, and that's it. And nobody talks to you about the only thing they do, they write it in your notes, FGM observed. And then that's it. But what people need to understand, especially healthcare professionals, is that they are in the center of this, because the only way most survivors will know or realize that they've gone through FGM is when they access health. It's either through pregnancy or something happened to them that needs examination, and it came out that they've got FGM. And some survivors don't even know that they've been through FGM because of the time they had it done. So all that is up to us, healthcare professionals, to see how we can help them to understand themselves and understand what kind of problems they have ahead. So, like you said, if we have support out there and we know how to access it, and that will help us survivors to be able to open up and trust you, because at the end of the day, this topic is based on trust. If we don't trust you, we cannot open up to you. And questions like safeguarding, wherever it is mentioned, people are scared to speak. People are scared to share their problems, because if it's a girl child, they think of, oh, if I mention anything about FGM, they're going to take my child away from me. So there's just what I want to add there, and also to say that anybody can ask questions.
Ba-da-bum-bum-bum.